Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Following talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, U.S. President Donald Trump has unveiled a 20-point peace plan to end the war in Gaza. The plan calls for an immediate end to fighting, the disarmament of Hamas, and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. So is the peace plan sincere and fair enough? Will Hamas and the Palestinian people accept it? And most importantly, can it truly bring stability and peace to the region? Join us for discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Daoud Kuttab, an award-winning Palestinian journalist and the Director General of the Community Media Network in Amman. Wang Jin, Director of the Center for Israeli Studies at Northwest University of China. And Dr. Sara Yael Hirschhorn, a visiting professor from the University of Haifa, and Rob Geist Pinfold, lecturer in international security at King's College London. Welcome to the show. Well, I'll start with Mr. Daoud Kuttab. First of all, I want to have your take of the peace plan. Is it the right one we need for peace and stability?
I don't think it's a peace plan because peace plans are between the parties. There was Israeli and American on television, but no Palestinian or Arab party. But it's hopefully it's a ceasefire plan. It has some good points and it has some points that are not clear. The only thing that has a timeline is the release of the hostages. No other timeline exists in this document of the Israeli withdrawal, which means that Israel has control over when they withdraw.
Well, Wang Jin, if you look at the points, as Mr. Kuttab said, there are some good points, but at the same time, yes, there's a lack of timetable, probably difficult to implement anyway. But is it fair enough for both the Israelis and the Palestinians, if you look at the plan, at least for ceasefire maybe?
Well, I think actually the ceasefire plan asks both Israel and Hamas to make some concession. From Israeli perspective, their concession should be concentrated upon, for example, allowing more international humanitarian assistance and aids to going into Gaza Strip. And also that maybe in the future ask for more international power, international money investment going back to the Gaza Strip for the reconstruction. And also from the perspective of Hamas, they have to make concessions over, for example, disarm themselves and turning them from the very dominant role in the Gaza Strip to the very marginal or even ignored role in the Gaza Strip. And also giving up any kind of the important role in the future Gaza authority, because the authority would be transferred into the international authority, cooperated closely with the Palestinian authority in the West Bank and coming back to Gaza again. So actually, if we look at this perspective, Israel will make concessions based upon the future. But the Hamas, particularly, they also have to release the hostages taken by themselves within 70 hours once the ceasefire reached. So they have to make the concessions immediately from the recent future perspective. So that's why maybe that if we look at this ceasefire details, maybe the two powers, two sides, Israel and Hamas, they both of them will make concessions, but maybe a little bit unfair because Israel concessions would be implemented in the future, but Hamas, the concessions would be made immediately once they accept the ceasefire.
Rob Geist Pinfold, thank you for joining us. What do you make of the peace plan?
Well, I think it's better than nothing. As Daoud said, I think the key element here that makes this stand out is the lack of Palestinian input here. Obviously, this is about a future for the Gaza Strip after Hamas. But the Palestinian Authority and indeed the Palestinians in general are very much bit parts here. I think something that stands out is Tony Blair's role, and this has obviously generated a lot of controversy because he's very much a tainted brand, not just in the Arab world but elsewhere, for the invasion of Iraq and other policy failures during his administration. I think that could actually work in the end, but if and only if it's not just Tony Blair calling the shots, but also other credible Arab actors and other Palestinian actors as well. The problem here, as is always the problem with post-conflict reconstruction, is you want to involve everyone. You can't just pick a side, because then you're seen as alienating the other side and creating an insurgency. But if you involve everyone, you end up with a case of too many cooks and power squabbles and struggles as well. So that's going to be the key issue here going forward. Who has input and how much input do they have? We still don't know the answer to that.
A good question here, Rob. Who has input, who does not have the input here? If you look at the points, 20 points, one of them is, a requirement for Hamas to lay down its arms. Do you think at this point the Hamas, is willing or ready to do that?
Hamas certainly is not willing to do that. The question is whether they can be strong-armed or induced to doing that. Now, I did see an interesting remark by the Qataris yesterday, who said that actually they now have the willpower and the ability to get Hamas to disarm and to get it to agree to this agreement. Now, that is a significant shift, because there is this misperception in Israel that Qatar controls Hamas. It's simply not true. But Israelis across the political spectrum seem to think that when Qatar says jump, Hamas says how high. But the fact that they're now saying, yes, we do have the ability and the willingness to do that, suggests there's been a change in the dynamics between Qatar and Hamas. Turkey is also involved in the negotiations. There are many Hamas members in Turkey as well. So Turkey is an important player here. So just as much as, there's this dynamic taking place between Netanyahu and the US and these summits on the White House lawn, there's also this parallel track of Hamas negotiating with the Qataris, with Turkey. And the question is still whether the US's goals are aligned with Qatar and Turkey's goals. That's something the jury is still very much out on that. And the amount of agency those players have to change Hamas's priorities is also an open question.
Mm-hmm. Daoud Kuttab, if you look at the plan, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee. And then the committee will be supervised by a new international transitional body, so-called Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by Trump, and then UK's former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Tell us, what kind of relationship it will be, or there will be, let's say, between the committee and the board, and also how will the committee be formed? Who will serve at the committee? What are the yardstick, the standards? Are we clear about that?
No, we don't know. Maybe somebody in Washington knows, but we don't know who will appoint. There was a number of opportunities by the Arab Summit to name those individuals who are technocrats, who are not belong to any political party. But that is one of the things that are vague, because he who appoints them can remove them. And so will it be done in consultation with the Palestinian or the PLO in Ramallah? Will it be done in consultation with Egypt and Iraq and Qatar and Jordan? There are many countries that have been involved in this process, Turkey, Indonesia, and other countries. So it's not clear who will appoint this group, but it's important that for the first time in the recent history, or in all the history, that the White House is willing to put a lot of pressure, which is good. And also, for the first time, international troops will be in occupied territories. Palestinians have always asked that international troops come into also the West Bank. We want international troops in Jenin, where the Israeli army and the settlers are carrying out havoc against the Palestinians in the West Bank. So this is a precedent that if it works, it will signal a gradual end of the Israeli occupation. But the question of dismantling Hamas, which the previous speaker talked about, it's not very clear. Trump did not say the dismantling of Hamas arms. Only Netanyahu spoke, and it's not very clear how it will be dismantled, who will disarm Hamas. The idea that they will voluntarily do it, they might make some kind of a gesture. Maybe a few people will give up their arms. But I don't expect that there will be a way to find out how many people and what has been given up. The question is, will there be a buy-in from Hamas? And to get a buy-in from Hamas, they need to be assured 100% that this will end the Israeli army in Gaza. Right now, we don't know. Netanyahu said, as much as they will dismantle, we will withdraw. So who's going to be the judge? Will the Israelis decide how often and when and how they will withdraw? Or will it be left open? And why would anybody, whether Arab or international, enter Gaza when Hamas is not totally approving the plan?
Daoud, also you mentioned about Hamas, whether they will lay down the weapons or not, in what way, that will be judged. But also, if you look at the possible role, basically there's no role for Hamas in the future governance of this strip. The plan also said that, Hamas and other factions, agree not to have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. There will be, we talk about the demilitarization of Gaza and the supervision of independent monitors. No role at all for Hamas. Is that something Hamas will be willing to accept?
Well, this is the Arab Summit plan said that there will be there will be a technocratic government, not Hamas, not anybody. And Hamas accepted that. They did not accept giving up the arms. That's, I think, the crucial issue. And also, we don't know what law would apply. Will the Palestinian law in the West Bank apply in Gaza, or will we have a new law by Mr. Trump and Mr. Tony Blair? Will it be a new form of colonialization, or will it be a temporary effort until there is an elected Palestinian leadership that can take over? So there are a lot of questions. I think people understand that in a temporary basis, there needs to be some kind of a change. But always the problem in our region is a temporary solution becomes a permanent one. So Oslo was 5-year, temporary plan went into 30-some years. So we want an end of the temporary plan without an open-ended one.
Yes, that's a good point there. Wang Jin, if you look at the Palestinian state, we talk about that because a couple of days ago, recognition of a Palestinian state by the French, the UK, Australia, Canada. So that is, of course, an issue standing out there. You think there's enough recognition? There will be a Palestinian state. There will be, two-state solution to this issue. If you look at this specific, response or text, Netanyahu said, quote, Gaza will be administered neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority. What does that mean? So, it's a temporary governance, like a committee. It's not a permanent, right?
It's true. Now, we have to understand.
I think...
Wang Jin, please. Yeah.
Okay, sure. I think, of course, we're talking about the Israeli stance as well as the international recognition and the future arrangements over the Gaza Strip. Because on the one hand, we have already, as you mentioned, Qinduo, that more and more states in the international community, particularly on the United Nations scenario, they have called for the independent Palestinian state. I mean, that represents the very strong willingness from international or strong attitude from international community over the concerns of what is happening between Israel and Palestine, because we know that during the past 2 years, a very strong scene could be witnessed is that Israel will not accept independent Palestine state, and the two-state solution would coming to the end if the international society did nothing. So that's why diplomatic as well as political pressure should be given very pressingly towards Israel. So that's why we are looking at the international community doing this. And on the other hand, I mean, if we look at the attitudes from Israel, of course, they still respond very assertively over this pressure, the criticism from the international community. And given the we have to say that, let's be frank, we have to say that Netanyahu is the obstacle, of course. But the problem is that inside Israel, Netanyahu's opinion represents the absolutely majority of Israeli people's thinking. So that's why I think it is very difficult in the very short term to transfer, to change Israeli attitudes, political from the social and the political dimension. And last but not least, we cannot forget the complicity in the Gaza Strip. because when we're talking about, for example, international authority would take over the Gaza Strip, who pay the money, where the money come from, and how can we guarantee that the Palestinian Authority, who had already been expelled by Hamas in 2007, could have the capabilities to come back and control very effectively of the situation in the Gaza Strip. These are all the problems. So that's why I think the 20-point plan designed by Donald Trump is just a kind of plan. It still needs time and patience to be further, particularly in detail, to be implemented. And so particularly, we have to say that we still have to wait for the agreement from both Israel and Hamas. So that's why the plan may be positive, but the road ahead is still full of difficulties.
Daoud, if you look at Netanyahu's response, his opposition to a Palestinian state, he said, it's not written in the agreement. We said we would strongly oppose a Palestinian state. And also he talked about, in the plan, talked about the Gaza development and Palestinian Authority reforms. They are set as conditions for a Palestinian state. If you take a look at the conditions, Netanyahu speaking to, I think, reporters, he said that basically, some of the reforms include stopping incitement in the media against Israel and stopping this lawfare against Israel at the ICC, ICJ, International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, and along with other conditions. What's your response to that?
Yeah. Well, I think that the PLO and the Palestinian government in Ramallah issued a strong welcoming statement to the plan, and they reiterated the reform roadmap that they will have elections 1 year after the ceasefire, and there will be also a change in the books in the curriculum to be matched by UNESCO, approved by UNESCO. So the Palestinian government is going ahead with the reforms that have been promised and have been talked about. I think the problem is these are artificial excuses not to allow Palestinians to emerge. I wrote a book called State of Palestine Now, and what we've seen in the recognition is that it's no longer a question of disputed territories. These are Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. Whether there will be a Palestinian state in 1 year or 10 years, we are no longer negotiating what's the future. We are now going to have negotiations sooner or later between the state of Palestine and elected people from the state of Palestine and the state of Israel about the borders and relationship. So I think the paradigm change happened when England, which was the controller of the Palestinian areas until 1948, and Tony Blair comes from the UK, have recognized the state of Palestine on the 1967 borders. So now we know the borders of the Palestinian state alongside of Israel, and we just need to have a negotiation between the leaders of both countries.
Well, thank you, Daoud. Thank you for joining us. And let's have Rob here. Rob, if you look at a part of this, let's say, responsibility from the Israeli side is the staged withdrawal of their forces, the Israel Defense Forces. But according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the IDF will stay in Gaza. I mean, which is different, let's say, different to the content, to the text of the proposal from the White House. What do you make of that? What's in the mind of...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Netanyahu has spun this already as a victory. He said, I went to the White House, and as a result, I got concessions from Trump. Israel will stay in the Gaza Strip, even though we were supposed to withdraw. And as Daoud has rightly mentioned, exactly how Israel will withdraw, when and to where is quite fuzzy. We know there'll be a phased Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. What Netanyahu will likely do is try and fudge the issue and say, look, we might have withdrawn from the Gaza Strip, but the agreement specifically stipulates that Israel will have a buffer zone inside of the Gaza Strip, a few kilometers inside of the Gaza Strip, therefore giving us strategic depth. And this is all part of the narrative that the Israeli right are selling, that we didn't have strategic depth before October the 7th, and therefore October the 7th happened, which is why Israel needs to take territory beyond its borders. This narrative completely ignores the fact that Israel had a buffer zone in the Gaza Strip, more or less exactly the same topography or the reach of that buffer zone as is proposed by this agreement. So it would be more or less a return to the pre-October the 7th status quo. Netanyahu knows that, but that's not something he's willing to admit in public, because he needs to sell it to his right-wing constituency as part of his package for the quote-unquote total victory or defeat of Hamas. So Netanyahu will want to say, look, I've got these concessions, but whether he actually gets those concessions or not is an open question. I haven't seen anything to show that Netanyahu has managed to get the Trump administration to bend to Israel's whims, as Netanyahu is triumphantly boasting about on social media right now.
Sara, welcome to the show. And what do you make of the Israeli withdrawal of their forces from Gaza? Of course, maybe that's connected to the idea of a temporary international stabilization force. If there's a deployment of this international force, so I imagine Israeli forces will withdraw from there.
Well, I guess that's the hope. It seems that the Trump administration plan is extremely ambitious, but also perhaps somewhat impracticable on a number of points, because even before you can get to the stage of the Israeli withdrawal, there has to be the handover of the hostages, and some other goals to be achieved. So I think Israel is reluctant, obviously, to withdraw from the Gaza Strip until it feels confident that that both of the hostages are home, but also that there is some kind of stabilization force, including this supposed apolitical Palestinian transition team, as well as a larger Arab framework, and the idea that Hamas can also be demilitarized and essentially vanquished from the Strip. So I think Israel wants to see the progress in the initial stages before it will withdraw. But obviously, the idea is that Israel must end the war, and that requires removing its troops from the Gaza Strip.
Well, Sara, at the same time, what's the response from the Israeli public to this peace plan? What we have is like, Netanyahu agrees probably to the plan, but his finance minister, for example, described the deal as, a resounding diplomatic failure that would end in tears. So it seems not everybody on the same page.
Well, look, I think large parts of the Israeli public have supported a deal for many, many months. Something like 73% of the Israeli public had hoped that the war would end, over the course of at least the last 12 months. So there's extreme pressure from the Israeli public and obviously from hostage families to end the war. And the fatigue amongst reservists who are now being called up sometimes for their fifth or sixth round of duty in the Gaza Strip is immense. And so I think that the Israeli public is largely supportive. However, you could see, as the statement from Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich indicated, that there's a lot of jockeying amongst the cabinet ministers, particularly amongst those to the right or the ultranationalist right of Benjamin Netanyahu and his parties, regarding their position on the deal, which has actually been rather consistent over the last year, that they have opposed any kind of diplomatic agreement and they've opposed a withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. You can read some of this as being campaign jockeying, because it is likely that the government may fall in light of these decisions, and that this is the kind of advanced preview of the new electoral campaign and people's politicians' positions there. But I don't necessarily think that the position of ultranationalist ministers is indicative of the larger position of the Israeli public.
Well, Wang Jin, on the other side, if you take a look at the views, Hamas says it is studying the U.S. proposal in good faith, but the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group says the plan is, quote, a recipe to blow up the region. Obviously, again, not everybody agrees with, to support the plan, right? I mean, how big a hurdle will that be?
Well, I think these would become major obstacles, because on the one hand, if you look at Hamas, it's not a very coherent organization with the order could be accepted by everybody. So when we are talking about the peace plan, as you just mentioned, that it asks the Hamas to dismantle themselves, to transfer themselves from a very dominant role in the Gaza Strip to the very ignored role in the future. So that would be very difficult, I think, within the short term, that these things could be accepted by everybody. Particularly, we're also talking about the Hamas is an umbrella organization, consisted of many factions and many blocs. So they still need time to coordinate their stance. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, there are still many other so-called extremist groups in the Gaza Strip, such as the Palestinian Jihad. So they also maintain that they should be respected. Their role should be highlighted. Their role should not be ignored, because in the Gaza Strip, there is Hamas, but also there are still Palestinian Jihad and other Palestinian military and political factions. So I think that is why the peace plan maybe is well designed, but it still needs time and needs more patience to be further discussed on the one hand, and also on the other hand to be implemented with much more efforts, particularly the political, diplomatic, and mediation efforts from the regional countries.
Well, Sarah, President Trump said Netanyahu would have U.S. backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas if Hamas did not agree to the plan. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel will finish the job if Hamas rejected the plan or did not follow through. So at least for now, before the start of the plan, what we expect is the fighting will continue, right?
I think so, but it seems that the Trump administration is putting immense pressure on Hamas to accept the deal behind the scene. The Trump administration invited Qatari officials to the White House yesterday, which they demanded an apology from Benjamin Netanyahu for the strike in Doha a few weeks ago, which was accepted. And it seems that was kind of a quid pro quo for the Qataris and also the Turkey, which was also in the White House. President Erdogan was visiting the White House last week, for both of those countries to put pressure on Hamas, as they are basically the intermediaries with Hamas, to accept the deal. It is clear that if Hamas doesn't accept the deal, that Israel has consistently said it will continue the fighting until the ultimate victory. Now, what an ultimate victory could look like in this scenario seems very far-fetched, and most of the Israeli public opposes this and would like to see a deal achieved. But it depends on whether Hamas will accept it. Israel has accepted it, whether it's really excited about the implementation of this deal or not. But we are still waiting to see what Hamas's response will be.
Well, Wang Jin, briefly, before we ended the show, there's a opinion piece on the Wall Street Journal saying that, Netanyahu now agree to the deal. The onus is on the Arab countries, Israeli neighbors, to finish the rest of the job. Before that, the fighting will go on. So what's the responsibility? What should the Arab countries do to help, implement probably to make sure the plan will be enforced there?
I think this is a very precise question, because as we know that Donald Trump just proposed a plan. But who should implement the plan? Israel should make concessions, Hamas should make concessions, but we cannot forget there were still some actors needs to pay the price. Needs to pay the price of humanitarian aid, need to pay the price of settling the humanitarian disasters in the Gaza Strip, need to pay the price for future reconstruction investment in the Gaza Strip. So if according to this plan, the Arab countries, particularly the Gulf monarchies, they have to pay the price. So that's why I think the Arab countries, on the one hand, they should continue their mediation efforts to bring Israel and Hamas together. Their stance is closer. And also, on the other hand, they have to pay more prices to the people in the Gaza Strip, to the people daily life, particularly tomorrow's reconstruction. So that's why I think it is a tough job, because the United States just speaks without doing anything seriously. But then the rest of the job would be transferred to the Arab states, particularly the Gulf monarchies. So that's why I think this is a difficult task. These are things that need more patience.
Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.